So today we're going to continue, this time with the Canaanite woman. There are two books that I'm looking at today, Back to the Well again, and Women in Scriptures. Okay. So what experience have you had with bias or oppression? And I'll start this out because this is kind of like one of those questions you're like, oh, I don't know what she wants. So I had an experience recently where I went with someone into a store, and I had known this person for a very long time. And it was new that they were in a wheelchair. And so I went into the store, we went in together, and we were expecting, we weren't going to take much, we weren't going to buy much. And when we got in the store, this person realized, oh, I need these items. And my immediate response was, oh, you need help. And then I went, well, okay, it took that person saying, I don't need help, I've got this. And then I went, oh yeah, okay, right. Because there are bags in the back of the wheelchair, there's that, right? But that was my experience of, okay, yes, I have overstepped and this is now ableism. And yes, I'm a nice person, but there are times when I can't see my own bias. So either a personal experience where it's happened to you, or you've seen it happen, you can do it however you want. You can share however you want.
So I'm a nurse, and I worked for 10 years at St. Vincent in the open heart surgery unit. And after 10 years, I decided I wanted to do something different. So I took a job at a manual. And so if you can think about kind of what the clientele at a manual might be versus the clientele at St. Vincent, it's very different. And right before I left, one of the cardiac surgeons came up to me and said, you don't want to go to that place because all they have is murderers and gangsters. And I was just taken aback that he would say something like that. And I just said, well, everybody deserves care. I mean, that was the only thing I could say, but it was just kind of astounding to me. Interestingly, his son was in a terrible car crash several years later and had to spend a month at a manual. I never saw him while that was happening, but I knew his son was in the hospital. So, we take care of everybody.
Yeah. I lived in Washington, D.C. for a while, and I had the experience of going into a store and being ignored because I was not a Black person.
Oh, interesting.
Huh.
Yeah, that's kind of a flip, isn't it?
It
Yeah,
kind of gives you, us white people, an idea of, how it feels. Because we're, say, Black people, well, not all, but a lot of times, I mean, that's wherever they go, that's the feeling they have. They're very, very much in the minority.
Yeah, I went to one, it was a joint choir thing, it was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and we had a bunch of different churches come together, and we were kind of doing the cross-cultural experience, and most of them were Black churches. And I was like, whoa, okay, I feel in the minority. And yeah, it was a little bit scary. Any other thoughts? Okay. All right. So we'll start by reading the story. Jesus left that place and went away to the district of Tyre and Sidon. Just then, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not answer her at all. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away, for she keeps shouting after us." He answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But she came and knelt before him, saying, Lord, help me. He answered, It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. She said, Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. Then Jesus answered her, Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish. And her daughter was healed instantly. So, first of all, they use the term Canaanite. And this is a term that is not used in the New Testament. It's a term that they used in the Old Testament, if you remember, as they were going into Canaan, that was the promised land. And I'm off my notes. So that was the promised land, and the Canaanites were in that land when Israel was poised to take possession of it. By identifying the woman as a Canaanite, therefore, Matthew spotlights her for his readers as an enemy, as pagan, as ethnic and religious outsider. The woman is from the land where Jesus is located at the time, which is Tyre and Sidon, which is a Gentile territory, so it's not a Jewish territory. Matthew is establishing that this woman is a Gentile. I wonder if the term Canaanite was used because now she's trying to get into the promised land. So Jesus calls her a dog, or compares her to a dog. And some scholars believe that Matthew is trying to establish an oral connection between the sounds of Canaanite and dogs because they sound familiar, they sound similar in Greek. By using this metaphor of a dog in Matthew 15:26, Jesus may be like a teacher trying to get the best out of a student by challenging her understanding, or it may actually be an insult. Dogs were apparently a term that Jews used to refer to groups of overtly hostile to God's people or laws. This is typically how the story is preached, that Jesus is insulting her and challenging her. Let's go back and look at the dialogue and see how she is treated and her faith develops. So just then, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not answer her at all. So what do you notice from this? What stands out to you?
For her to say son of David is interesting since she wasn't a Jew.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that is a term that is used, it's an earthly title for Jesus. What else about this? What does she, what is her posture at this moment? What do you imagine she's doing?
So if she's shouting, she's probably very aggressive,
Mhm.
which could be perceived as like an attack.
Right. Why do you think she's aggressive?
I think she's desperate.
Yeah, she wants healing. Yeah. And at this time, she's in a public place right now. And at this time, the public space was the domain of men. And so public debate happened, but the women typically did not participate. This woman approaches Jesus in a public space and shouts and is very insistent. She does not follow the social rules that say that women should be quiet and the public space is for men. She initiates the interaction by shouting. Take a look at this conversation. I think it's important that she steps outside the social expectations. When people are protesting, what do?
They try to get attention and they shout.
Sometimes they shout, yeah.
And
In-
typically they break,
interruption- Interruption,
Hmm.
And they break social norms.
true,
And they don't listen.
Right.
that's
Well,
true.
yeah, and his response actually is he didn't listen to her because he's like, okay, well, she's not playing by the rules, right? So we're not going to listen to her. So it's very interesting. I never really looked at the whole conversation that goes on here.
But Jesus didn't play by the rules. I mean, I'm not so sure that's why he was silent. I
Right.
don't know why he was silent, but
Right?
you know, he knows about not playing by the rules. So
Oh yeah, he does.
yeah.
Yeah, we'll keep going. Don't worry.
She was also very scared, I think.
Scared. Yeah, maybe. Because she's doing something that isn't normal, right?
And maybe she knew that she would be discriminated against.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away, for she keeps shouting after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." So do you think the disciples are, okay, so the translation on this is that it could mean send her away, and it could mean give her what she wants. It's kind of, the Greek there is just very, it's very fuzzy. So what do you think that they're trying to do based on the context?
I think they're trying to lessen their own anxiety because she's bothering them.
Appease, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense to me too.
And
Because,
it's interesting that his answer appears to be an answer to the disciples. He isn't speaking to the woman at this point.
right, yeah, she still doesn't register on his radar. Yeah. Okay. And it does seem like they're urging him because of how he responds to them. He's saying, no, no, I'm not sent to deal with this woman. She's not part of my flock. But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." He answered, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." So what do you notice here?
Well, he's being unkind.
Mhm. What about her? What's her posture?
She changed her apparently, obviously her position, because now she's kneeling, and probably her tone. So she kind of changed.
Mhm. What do you think of when somebody's kneeling?
Meditation.
Meditation, prayer, right?
Pleading,
Pleading. Absolutely.
Humility, being humble.
Humility.
Mhm.
Reverence. She's humbling herself.
Yeah. And reverence, yes. So, and she says, "Lord, help me." That sounds like a prayer, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So this is a Gentile woman, and yet she started out calling him son of David, and now she's praying to him. And so Jesus, by using the metaphor of the dog, he may be trying to get the best out of the student, trying to challenge her understanding, or it may be an actual insult. Let's keep going.
What was the status of dogs in those times?
Oh, yeah, it wasn't good. I don't remember exactly, but yeah, it wasn't a compliment, that's for sure.
Unlike today.
Yeah, today, you know, well, in Oregon at least, right? Okay. She said, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus answered her, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed instantly. So what do you notice here?
She's clever. She has a good thinking mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
She figures it out what he said and why.
Yeah. Right. She actually, and notice her words, she's using master to refer to Jesus, and master and Lord are the same word in Greek. And she's still claiming that Jesus is Lord in her life. So she refers to him as Lord and master in verse 27. At this point, she's acknowledging that she wants healing from God. So what are the intentions of Jesus here? Can we assume positive intent?
I don't think so. I think Jesus is shown here to be human like we're human. He had a moment of unkindness and somebody called him on it and he repented. I think Jesus saw that what he had said was wrong and corrected himself.
Yeah, that could be, because we're talking about Jesus is supposed to be incarnate, supposed to be part of who we are, kind of representing who we are. So it's possible. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Could he have been just distracted? I mean, he had a mission. He wanted to achieve that mission, and this was distracting him from going about doing what he had intended to do. And so it may not have been unkindness so much as I'm busy. Let me get to what I need to get to. Certainly the intent, the result was unkindness. What I wonder is, you know, his comment was, you know, great is, you know, I can see that you have great faith. Well, how did that comment that she had enlighten him to that?
Or does he see it as a teaching opportunity for his
For
disciples?
her, for the disciples.
The person writing the gospel, you know, it could have been a surprise that she showed up, but then it's possible that the way it worked out became something that was a teaching opportunity and they retained the story, or maybe just because it was an unusual story.
So two things. One is Luann, definitely he was trying to get away, because at the very beginning, he said he was going to Tyre and Sidon. And because he originally thought that his mission was only to the people of Israel, that was outside of their zone where the Jewish people hung out, right? So he was actually trying to get away, in theory, to get away and kind of rest a little bit and then come back later. But people don't leave him alone. So that was the first thing. And then Peggy, you were talking about that maybe he was kind of exposing what happened in culture, right? He's kind of taken this as a teachable moment, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I could see him saying well, I don't help anyone but the Jewish people, you know, and then then his disciples are saying, please help her, you know, get her to, maybe just to get her to stop, but also he made them ask for him to do that.
Yeah, right.
Well, interestingly, he also has given the Great Commission, which isn't unique to Jews.
Right. And something that was going on within these communities at the time was that they were kind of contesting that. They were trying to figure out, okay, what is our mission? And some people were saying, yes, we're supposed to go past the Jews. And others were saying, no, we're staying there. So this was a real, a bone of contention type thing where they were trying to figure it out. Mary, did you have something?
I was just wondering what would have happened if the poor woman would have just burst into tears, which is probably what I would have done if you would have said that to me.
Yeah, I don't know.
But she was pretty determined. It's funny because I've been thinking lately about the seeds falling in the weeds. And I've been thinking about, now I know this is a long way around, but I've been thinking about the seeds attracting weeds, all right? Because wherever the farmer has prepared the soil and ready for good crop, then the weed seeds are going to do well there too. And so the weeds are happy to be on the fringes and maybe get some of the water and stuff, okay? So I see this Canaanite woman as a weed on the fringe, trying to get something, some help from a source that she normally would not be able to access. You know, okay.
And so
Well-
maybe the whole purpose of this story is so, because it was written many years later. So maybe the whole purpose of this little vignette is like, oh yes, you know, Jesus is for everybody who has, you know, if they have the faith.
Yeah. I like your analysis there, Peggy. That's interesting.
Yeah, I love it.
Well,
Alright.
it does start making an interface between Jews and Gentiles. Why it's okay to talk to the Gentiles, you know? I mean, there is going to be the people going out to convert them later. And this is not something that, for the most part of the Old Testament, why the Hebrews keep trying to separate themselves and not have their people mix with the other cultures that were around and become, you know, trying to be isolated. And they had a problem because there was a certain amount of desire. Ahab married Jezebel, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I think it opens a door maybe to treating the Gentiles better, acknowledging the Gentiles.
Sounds good. Okay. Okay, so we'll go to the scholars now. The author of Matthew believes that Jesus's mission is to the people of Israel. This was a debate among early Christians. Jesus's words of rejection could be reflecting the ideas of the Christian community that wanted to limit the mission to only Jews. It is possible that this story is used to highlight that because of how difficult it is to convince Jesus to heal the woman's daughter. This healing of a Gentile shows that God is here with us now in the form of Jesus and is compassionate about what we are going through, and that Jesus is urging us to reach out to all. Okay, so, and I don't know if I expressed this the way I wanted to express it, but how do you deal with oppression? When there is, in the society, there is this attitude, for example, of, okay, the Gentiles are not equivalent to us, they're lesser than us. How do you deal with that in society? You can't just say, oh yeah, they are, right? So this, I think, is Jesus's answer. He's saying, okay, let's go through these steps of what society would do, and then show that that's not valid. Does that make sense? Maybe. Okay. Anyway,
This is more explicit than Jesus's feminist behavior when he talks to the woman at the well. In order to understand that Jesus was doing something astounding when he spoke to the woman at the well. You have to have someone fill in for you that Jewish men were not supposed to speak to women in public, and were especially not supposed to speak to women they weren't related to, and especially weren't supposed to speak to women who weren't Jews. So when he speaks to the woman at the well, it's a great big deal. In this story, the fact that it's a big deal that he heals somebody outside of the Jewish faith is actually held up for us, so you don't need as much interpretation.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
It seems to be that God was telling Jesus to get with it. And I think this is a get with it message that God gave Jesus and the whole people there
Yeah.
about women.
Yeah, it's quite possible. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And you see that the woman's faith kind of grows as we follow this story. And that's one of the characteristics that Matthew does in his gospel. Well, the author of Matthew does in the gospel, is that it highlights worshiping in faith. Matthew's audience was also thought to be well-to-do and therefore more privileged than most. This story illustrates what oppression can look like. Oppression can be difficult to recognize for those who are not oppressed. The privileged may just see that their needs are met and not think about how others experience cultural systems. Kind of going with what Janine was saying, this story is starting with Jesus ignoring, then insulting the woman, may be written to show that Jesus changes his mind. He starts out thinking that this isn't his concern because Jesus's mission is to Israel. But then at the end, he heals her. This models humility and servant leadership by Jesus, listening to the people around him when challenged with his bigger mission of bringing God into the world. There's something interesting to notice. Something interesting to notice is that this is different from the typical dialogue that Jesus engages in. Usually it's Jesus who's the one who kind of has that stinger at the end of the conversation, right? In this case, it's a controversy dialogue, which is typically there's a hostile question based on an event, and then Jesus comments in a way that reveals the kingdom of God in some way. In this case, the roles are reversed. The woman is the one who prompts the revealing of the kingdom of God. So this, you could kind of look at this and say, in that case, this is a very empowering story because the woman is the one who's saying this is the way we're supposed to go. Does it matter that this character is a woman, do you think?
I think if it had not been a woman, the character would not have been described as shouting at Jesus, because probably the male person would have been closer to Jesus, wouldn't have had to shout.
Mm-hmm.
I think having it be a woman is more pronounced, it's more observed, I would think, by them.
More unusual, is that what you're
It's
saying?
more radical.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Well, it matters to us, and it matters to the readers of the Bible that the character in the story is a woman, because all through the centuries we've had to look at how Jesus treats women.
Right? Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So where do you see faith, grace, hope, in this story? We already talked about because she is kind of revealing the kingdom of God. So that's empowering. Any other thoughts?
Well, so often we will pray for something And it seems as though God has said, no, you know, we don't get our answer. And this encourages us to keep praying.
Yeah, it's an argumentative prayer, right? So it's saying, come on, God, really? This is
Yeah.
what I want. Maybe that's how we approach our kids sometimes too. It's like, do you really want this?
It occurs to me that she feels pretty free to use her good thinking mind to challenge what Jesus has said. And I certainly feel free to use my good thinking mind to think about my faith and to be unhappy sometimes with God.
Mhm. Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, I feel like she breaks down some of the barriers between the peoples as well.
This is a whole thing about women, and it's
There's empowerment just because she did it. I mean, she took action.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and at the end it says her daughter is healed instantly. So you got to wonder, how did they know? Was the daughter with her the whole time? It's an interesting thing to think about. So what can we learn from this story today to apply to our world?
Perhaps when we have an impulse to say something like Jesus said, you know, this is not for you, or this is not where you belong, maybe we should stop and reconsider.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
I like that the woman stood up, tried to achieve what she needed, you know, didn't just become submissive in the role the culture gave her.
Yeah, she takes the initiative, so it's something
Yeah.
unusual. Yeah, absolutely.
Initiative, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe that's an indicator of when we want to be healed, maybe we need to take the initiative sometimes as well. Okay. I guess when I look at this, it looks like Matthew shows us that she's excuse me, a hated outsider, and then her daughter is healed anyway. And this highlights the idea that God's grace is truly for all. This story gives hope to all who are oppressed by racism, sexism, etc., that there are ways to change people's minds and therefore end the oppression. Sometimes it requires shouting or making people uncomfortable, but it definitely requires persistence, faith, and ingenuity. It is possible to face oppression in a non-violent way, and that is how Jesus would want us to do it.
The spirituality book group read Austin Channing Brown's book. I think it's called I'm Still There. And she talked about when she is, you know, fighting for her rights, demanding her rights in the workplace, just to be treated as an equal in the workplace. She is often described as being angry or, you know, out of line. And so it kind of like this woman, you know, she at the beginning, the way they described her, by saying shouting, it was like she was being out of line to shout at Jesus. Who shouts at Jesus? But Black women, many Black women that I've known have said, you know, we would get nowhere if we just sat in the corner and waited for someone to do something nice for us. You must step out and challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
I
Yeah.
think the fact she was a woman is a big part of this, because women were not treated that well.
I think
at the time,
education.
many for forever, maybe, you know.
Yeah. Susan, did you have something?
I think education of the woman matters too. Maybe that's what, you know, why she was so vocal in the story, because of her education, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, something that we talked about in class is that there are differences in the classes as well. So the women that were more educated were more able to, and wealthy, were more able to be outside of the house and more active in regular life, I guess. And this person was definitely more more wealthy than some of the other ones. And some scholars believe that that was one of the reasons that Jesus hesitated, was because she wasn't a poor person. So, yeah, who knows? Any other thoughts? Okay. Something I see is that churches in general, we tend to be very close knit. And while this story represents an attitude of taking care of each other, it also shows that sometimes this group is exclusionary in nature. With Matthew's underlying goal of teaching about discipleship, this story could be a warning about our faith taking care of our own, but not letting outsiders in. Are we doing things in our community that are oppressing some of our church family? How do we treat kids, the disabled, the homeless? Are all truly welcome in this place? Just things to think about as we're going forward. In a more privileged context, this story could help people think about how they might be oppressing their neighbor, or how their neighbor might be experiencing life. Also, how do the cultural systems around us work? Are the systems oppressing and we don't see it because we are privileged? What are our own implicit biases? The next time someone speaks up, maybe we'll think about whether what they're saying could be true for them, even if it isn't true for us. So, any other thoughts?
It's an old social work thing to start with believing the person.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody is telling you they've got a problem, start with believing them rather than kicking them to the side.
I also think implicit bias is one of those things that everybody has it, and everybody, you will always have it. But being able to recognize or question, is my bias playing into the situation, is the step that you need to take.
That's a good point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right here in our neighborhood around St. Andrew, I mean, we have the Homes Association of Cedar Hills, which does a great deal of oppressing people. And even though the rules that we follow are, there is an option where you could get enough people, it had to be 75%, but get enough people to vote to change the rules somehow never get changed. And one of the rules is that you can't park your car in your driveway if it has on it the logo of the company you work for. No company cars or trucks or nothing with a ladder is allowed to be parked in the neighborhood where it's visible. And this was originally in the Homes Association rules because they didn't want to have people who were working with their hands live here. They wanted people who had higher, fancier jobs living here. And of course, the rules originally said that you had to be white to live here too. So there's quite a history of oppression, and it's right here in our neighborhood.
Amazing.
You think about the women who were not heard until they really spoke out, like the Me Too movement and the gymnast who even went to the police, allegations against the coach, doctor, and were not believed until enough of them got together and spoke out. And the same thing is going toward allegations against some of the politicians about sexual abuse.
Yeah, it's definitely a problem in our culture. No doubt.
I have the theory that although it depends on the opportunity, but that women should take more responsibility for government. Some other things where it has been so male dominated, because the group think of just men doesn't have much variation in it, you know. It kicks everybody, marginalizes everybody else, where if it were a mixture of men and women and different other different minorities, which is the direction we're going, then the marginalization would be represented. I remember back in 68 was an incredible year. It just was almost like 2020 in a way. And there are so many things that have only existed since the late 60s or the 60s, like women having credit in their own names. Women did not have credit in their own names. If your husband died, so did your credit history.
Yeah.
I mean, there are things that we sort of take for granted that are not that old, and it's kind of amazing. And I do feel that although that bit of women's involvement has been eclipsed by some of the things that have happened now with women in Congress and all these things, it's amazing what got done in the 60s. Okay, I just, when you get all these men together, they think in a macho way, and I just think we would have fewer wars and maybe more and inclusive laws if we had a more variety in who's doing it.
Makes sense. Yeah, I noticed this weekend that the Boston Marathon, women were allowed to run in 1972, which surprised me. I mean, so women weren't allowed to run before that? I mean, like, you know, I don't understand.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
Well, I know that they said for the pandemic that some of the countries that were run by women weren't having such a bad time with the pandemic as other countries.
Yeah, I did see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like Loving, the film Loving that we watched a couple months ago or something, that was set in 58, I think. And the guy couldn't marry a black woman. I mean, that was only in whatever it was, Virginia or something. I mean, Mary Ann pointed out that in Ohio, the law was changed back in 1897 or something. But in 58 in Virginia, he still couldn't marry a black person. Ridiculous.
Thank you, Karen.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yes, thank you.
Thank,
I feel like next time I'll have more questions at the end so that we can fill this time.
Karen, who are we doing next week?
You know what? Next week I think is going to be Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist.
All right.